Hello and welcome to the Complete Data Science channel. And this is the Data Science Daily Series, and I welcome you back again here. Today we are going to continue our discussion on comprehensions in Python and going to understand how do we add conditional statements to the comprehensions. So last time what we saw is how do you create comprehensions, what do these even mean, and why do we care? Today, what we will do is we will add conditional statements and try to make this more and more complex going forward, right? So good news and a little bit of bad news. Not really bad news, just joking. All right, so let's get started and hope you can all see my screen. So today the focus is going to be on adding conditionals. And before we dive into today's session, let's have a quick recap. What are comprehensions? They are a powerful way to concisely create and manipulate new data structures like lists, sets, and dictionaries. Only these three, because these three are the ones that are mutable, right? Tuples and frozen sets are not mutable, so you cannot actually use comprehensions, right? That's the logic behind not having comprehensions for them. There are three main types, right? List, set, and dictionary comprehensions. They offer conciseness, readability, efficiency, right? Now, what is the basic syntax? Just a quick recap. The basic syntax for a list comprehension is as follows. So you want to create a new list, right? So this should be a new list is equal to expression for item in iterable, right? You define some expression and then you do a for loop, right? For item in iterable is basically doing a for loop and it's evaluating that expression every time and appending that to the list just using this one line of code. And you can have an optional if condition towards the end if you want to add any conditions. And this is going to be a focus. How do you add conditions to the list comprehensions, set, and dictionary comprehensions? And a quick recap on the syntax, right? So we just saw for the list comprehension, this is what it looks like. This is what you are just looking at. Number squared for number in numbers, right? So number squared is the expression. For number here is the item, and numbers is the iterable. For dictionary comprehension, it's basically you don't have one expression, you have a key expression and you have a value expression, because remember, dictionaries are key value pairs. So number colon number squared for number in numbers, and this gives you a dictionary comprehension. The brackets are like curly braces because this is the syntax for dictionaries. And the syntax for set is also using curly braces, but you don't have key value pairs anymore. You just have, just the expression itself. So just one expression. And it only keeps the unique elements. Now let's look at single condition statements. How do we add single conditions to the comprehensions? So if condition is going to be your condition, your only condition, if you want one condition, you're going to use the if statement, right? Now, let's say I want to create a list of natural numbers less than 4, right? How do I do this? So without using comprehension, what I would do is I would say positive numbers is an empty list. And then what I would do is I would keep on appending numbers to the list as long as they are less than 4. So I will say for number in numbers, remember, I've already defined numbers as this, right? So numbers is defined in the beginning itself. That's why it is referenced. And actually, let me do this. Let me restart the kernel, right? So that when you run it from the top, it starts from 1. All right. So this will make it very, very clear. All right. So now this is the 6 cell and positive numbers is an empty list. For number in numbers, if number is less than 4, positive numbers dot append number, right? So these are natural numbers, right? 1 to 5. So we're just using this list as a starting point, and it's going through each of these items, right, one by one, and it's appending it only if the item is less than 4 or the element is less than 4, right? And that's what you do in these 4 lines of code, and you get the output as positive numbers is the list 1 to 3. Now, if you want to use comprehension, you can just do it in one line, right? How do you do that? Number for number in numbers, if number is less than 4. So if you have a single if condition, the if condition will always come towards the end, right? Regardless if it is a list comprehension, if it is a dictionary comprehension or a set comprehension, it will always come towards the end, right? So the positioning remains consistent across the different kinds of comprehensions. And you will see that it is again, giving us the same output. Positive numbers is 1, 2, 3. All right. Now, Let's look at another example for a set comprehension. Create a set of unique letters excluding vowels from the string. And the string that we are going to use is basically hello world, right? So this is my starting string. Just to make it very, very clear what I'm referring to. This is the starting string. And I'm also defining vowels as a tuple, right? Remember, these parentheses are tuples. Why am I defining these as tuples? Because vowels, this is the 5 set of vowels in the English alphabet. So it's not really that we want to change this or make this mutable. That's why I'm just using an immutable data type. And this defines the design in your code, right? If something is not required to be mutable, make it immutable, because immutable is definitely much, much cleaner than a mutable data type, right? When you don't require to change the values itself. And you will not also be able to do it by mistake, right? If you're defining some immutable data structure. So that's the benefit. Now, what I do next is I create a unique letters set using this syntax for a set comprehension, the curly braces, but the inside expression remains the same. So letter for letter in starting string, right? So this is similar to what we just saw. Now I'm adding the conditions to it, right? And let's just add a condition that, so I'm adding actually 2 conditions. Let's skip this. Let's show only 1 condition for now. Right, so for letter in starting string, if letter not in vowels. So what it will do is it will iterate over each letter in this string, basically, right? Each element in the string is basically a letter or a space bar, right? Between hello and world, you have a space bar. It'll iterate and it'll say if that is not in the vowels tuple, then just keep adding it to the set. And the set basically will only keep unique elements, right? So what will happen, right? You have H, you have LL, you have W, R, L, D. But remember, L is repeating thrice here, so it will only be counted once. So let's run this. Right, so you have D, H, L, R, W, and you also have the space bar, right? And to remove the space bar, we saw that we can add one more condition, which is it is not an alphabet, right? It has to be an alphabet, actually, the other way. It has to be an alphabet, right? So you can add that condition which we had added here, right? If letter is alpha, we'll do that, and letter not in vowels, right? But I hope you understand the overall concept of using a single if condition, right? Now, with this example that I have just shown you for set comprehension, here we are using actually 2 conditions. So let us transition into multiple if conditions and look at it in a bit more detail. So let's look at 2 conditions now, and there are 2 variants in which you can use 2 conditions. You can either have 2 if conditions, that if this happens, then do this, right? So this is one combination of 2 conditions. The other combination of using 2 conditions is if this happens, then do this, else, right? For everything else in every other scenario, do this, right? So these 2 situations are different. In the first situation, you're using, right? This is the first one that we'll cover, 2 conditions with using 2 if conditions. You're defining that if something happens, then do it, right? So you have to define the condition that has to be true for something to happen. Whereas in the second case, it's an if-else condition. So you're just defining one condition, and everything other than that condition basically gets executed in the else statement. So this is kind of slightly different. So keep that in mind. And the syntax also changes when you are actually implementing it in a comprehension, and we'll shortly see how it changes between these 2 situations. So let's first start with 2 if conditions. Now, I want to create a list of the square of numbers that are divisible by 2 and greater than 2. So from the original numbers list, which is basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I want to create a new list which has squared of these elements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but the element should be divisible by 2 and it should be greater than 2, right? So how do you do this? So you're creating an even squares empty list, and then you're saying for each number in the original list, right, 1 to 5, if number modulo is equal to 0, remember modulo is taking the remainder. So if the remainder is equal to 0 when you're dividing by 2, that means it's divisible by 2. And number is greater than 2. So I'm adding if number is divisible by 2 and is greater than 2, then basically append the number squared to that list, empty list right now. It's initialized as an empty list. So Even squared, basically, if you do this, remember 1, 2 will not get counted because they are less than 2. 3 is not divisible by 2. 4 is divisible, and then 5 is not divisible. Right? So only 4 will be there. And the even squares list will be 16. With me so far? Now, let's see the same thing when we use a comprehension. So even squares is equal to, now what I do is, same syntax as before. Number squared for number in numbers, if number modulo 2 is equal to 0 and number greater than 2, right? So this is the syntax for using multiple if conditions, right? This is the first way to use multiple if conditions. Either you can just say if number is divisible by 2 and number greater than 2, or if I scroll down a little bit and look at this alternate syntax, here what you can also do is you can say number squared for number in numbers if number is divisible by 2, if number greater than 2, right? So this is a less common syntax, but this is just to demonstrate that this kind of a syntax exists within comprehensions, right? So it's same as saying, right, what we are doing here. So this particular method, what it is doing is alternate syntax. It's basically, instead of using the AND statement, it's just nesting it within this. It's doing this basically, right? So what we were doing earlier is we nested. So we basically said if one condition and the other condition, or you can also do if this condition, if this condition, right? So it's actually doing the same thing, right? So that's what this is about. Very, very straightforward, right? I hope. If not, make sure you are watching this again, pausing the video, thinking about it, implementing it in your own Jupyter notebook, and then only it will be within your grasp. So make sure you're grasping it. If you have any doubts which are not getting cleared, make sure you're posting it in the chat, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Now let's look at multiple if conditions for a dictionary comprehension, right? For dictionary comprehension, this is a first example of using conditional statements. Similar syntax: number colon number squared, right? This is the key value pair for number in numbers if number is divisible by 2 and number greater than 2. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a dictionary where the keys are the original numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the values are the squared, right? 1, 4, 9, 16, and so on. So here only 4 colon 16, right, will get outputted, because that's the only element which is satisfying, right? 4 is the only one. That's why you only have this kind of a dictionary output, right? Clear so far? And similarly for set, we can see that, you know, we do the same thing with the vowels. We remove it. But in this case, let's say we also want to, okay, so we are not excluding vowels here, right? What we are only doing is we want to check if letter is alphabet and letter less than L, right? So what it was initially giving us is, let me also do one more. So let me give one more condition, right? So if letter not in vowels, so it will do letter not in vowels, it will do letter is alphabet, right? Whatever element is there, it's an alphabet. It's not a space bar, it's not an exclamation mark, and so on. And letter is less than L. That means it should be before L in the English alphabet. And you will get exactly this. So that is DNH. From this string hello world, only DNH letters satisfy this condition. So I have added 3 conditions here, right? So this is not just about 2 conditions actually. You can add as many conditions as you can, as you want, right? But only using if. We are not used else or else if right now. We are only using the if statement. Okay, so this is about using if conditions, and we have concluded what can we do with using only if conditions. If you're using only if conditions, a very, very important point to keep in mind, like it should be the main takeaway from this session. If you're using only if conditions, the if condition always comes towards the end of the comprehension, right? In this case, it's towards the end. In this case, also it's towards the end, and so on. Why am I stressing this? Because when you start adding else and else if conditions in addition to the if condition, what would happen is that all of these conditions will come in the beginning, right? They move from the end to the beginning, right? Somewhere in the middle, basically, just after the expression that needs to be evaluated, these conditions come, and then the for statement comes, right? So right now what's happening is for the expression comes, the for statement comes, and the if condition comes. When you're adding else and else if statements, the expression comes, the conditions come, which is if, else, else if, whatever you're using, right? That comes, and then the for statement comes. So that's the difference. Now let's look at this using two conditions, using the if else condition. Now the question here is, for each number in the numbers list, tag it with less than 3 or greater than equal to 3, right? So you can see that this is kind of a combining these two, less than 3 and greater than equal to 3, basically forms the entire set of possible scenarios, right? So if you have a question like this, you have to use the if else statement. You don't need to use the if statement, right? You need to use the if else statement, because that's what the question is asking you to do. Less than 3 or greater than equal to 3. That is, if less than 3, then do this. Else, right? The else will automatically understand that it is greater than equal to 3, do this, right? Okay, so the raw way to do this is number signs is equal to empty list for number in numbers. If number is less than 3, then do this. If number is greater than 3, then do this. And this is just, a fancy way of adding that particular statement, that tag it with less than 3. So I'm using an f string, and I'm adding the number value here, actual number value, and less than 3. I'm also tagging it with less than 3. So let's do this, and you will see that this is the output. Now you can do the same thing with using a comprehension. How do you do that? You would say number signs is equal to, right, this particular thing, this particular expression, tag the number with less than 3. If, now notice that if is coming in the beginning just after this. So do this if number is less than 3, else do this, right? Tag it with greater than equal to 3 for number in numbers. This is the magic of using both if and else statements, right? What happens is, first you say, do this if some condition holds true, else do this, right, for number in numbers, for that particular item in iterable. And this is the method of using comprehension. You have used now if and else conditions, both of them. Okay, very, very important concept. I hope you have understood this. If not, make sure you're pausing it, rewatching this section again. Now let's move on to dictionary comprehensions. How do you do this same thing for a dictionary, right? And now what will happen again in a dictionary, it is the if else conditions will move to the beginning, right? They will not stay towards the end. And it's very interesting how that works. So dictionaries are unique. Why? Because they don't have one expression, they have two expressions, the key expression and the value expression. So the if else conditions can actually apply on either only key expression, right? Or they can apply on only value expression, or they can apply on both the conditions or both the expressions. So here in this example, I'm only applying if else on the value expression, right? So create a dictionary using dictionary comprehension. So I'm saying number signs dict is equal to number. This is the key expression. No condition is applied. So take every number in that for loop that you have defined towards the end, right? And then how do you want it to handle, right? So the value will be handled is like this. So tag it with less than 3 if number is less than 3, else tag it with greater than 3, right? So I'm doing this, and I'm enclosing this entire if else, right? For the value expression, basically this if else is getting in a parenthesis. I'm making this within the parentheses for Python to understand that this is just the value expression. This entire thing is just the value expression. Within that value expression, I'm using the if else condition. All right. So this is how it works, and you will see that number signs dict is the same thing, right? This is not always covered everywhere, right? So this might be a new concept, and this is very important for you to grasp to stand out from the crowd, right? What happens when you want to use an if-else condition within a dictionary comprehension? Now let's come to the last set of conditional statements which we will cover today, which is you want to use more than two conditions using if else if, and else conditions. So you can use more than two conditions with just the if condition as well, right? But here we are not talking about that. What we are talking about is if you want to nest it or make it such that, if this happens to this, else if this condition happens to this, else if this condition happens to this, right? This is the way that you want to nest it, right? Think about why this is different from simply using more than two conditions with an if statement, right? And that is a very important distinction you should always keep in mind. How is using if, else if, else if, else if, and else, right? This kind of a structure. So I'll just note this down, note this structure down, using if, else if, and else, right? How is this different from using if? How are these two different? And let me just make these markdowns, right? Yeah. So how are these two different? Now, what happens is in the first case, right? This is the first case. What happens is, let me just format it, right? This is the first case. And this is the second case. Now, in the first case, what happens is, if a particular statement holds true, you will execute something, right? You will execute that. Else, right? Else will only be called, right? Else if will only be called if the first condition doesn't hold true. Then this else if will be called. Otherwise, it will not be called. Then if this else if is also not holding true, so the first two conditions are not holding true, then only the third else if, the third condition will be executed. And if the first three conditions, if, else if do not hold true, then only the else condition will get executed, right? So this is what happens when you're using an if, else if kind of a structure. Whereas in the second case, where you're just using multiple ifs, the first if will get executed, the second if will get executed, the third if will get executed, and the fourth if will get executed, right? So something to keep in mind, right? Make sure this is very, very clear to you. And I want to make this very explicit because, right, this is a very important distinction for you to keep in mind when you're designing your programs. And at this point, you are good enough to actually start thinking about, designing simple programs. We're using a for loop, while loop, and using the if-else conditions. Now, in the first case, it's obviously kind of, dependent. Each condition is dependent on whether the previous condition was true or not. In the second case, right, if you're just using if, right, without nesting them, everything will get executed, right? So if statement do this, then another one is if statement do this, right? If do this, and so on. You can also nest the if conditions, right? So this is here what we did is, this is where we nested it, right? What I've highlighted. So we are not referring to this nesting right now. We're just referring to if these are all, separate if statements, just one below the other, right? We're just talking about that. All right. Okay. So this is about important distinction between if, else, and multiple if conditions. All right, let's come back to our discussion. Now let's see how do you add more than two conditions using an if, else if, and else kind of a structure. It's very, very similar to what we just saw for the if, else. For a list comprehension, right, now I'm saying for number in numbers, if number is less than 3, then say it's less than 3. If it is equal to 3, make it equal to 3. This is the new condition. And if it is greater than 3, basically I'm just using the else here. I do not need to say else if number is greater than 3. I could also do this. It will give me the same output. But for cleaner implementation, make it else, right? Because that's how you want it to be. That's the best way you can do it, right? So you're optimizing for the statements as well. Now the method using comprehension is simply, you do this like this expression if number is less than 3, else this expression if number is equal to 3, else this expression for number in numbers. And this is a list comprehension, right? That's how we are defining it. So do this if this is there, if this statement holds true, else do this if the second condition holds true, else do this for number in numbers, right? So this is kind of the syntax for multiple conditions with using else, else if, and if conditions. Now in dictionary comprehension, again, this is how we can do it. The only thing that we are doing here is we are keeping a condition on, we're using conditional statements with value expression only. Remember, we can use them with key expressions only as well, or we could use it with both key and value expressions, right? So you can experiment with this and see how that works. Number, again, the same syntax what we use for the list comprehension, right, will also apply for the value expression. Here, number less than 3 if number is less than 3, else number equal to 3 if number is equal to 3, else number greater than 3 for number in numbers. And this is again within a parenthesis because we want Python to understand that this is a value expression. This is one expression. Do not break this down in the middle and evaluate it. Evaluate this as one single entire value expression within which you have these multiple if, else if conditions which are getting applied. If you do this, right, you will get this output. Now, one interesting thing I also want to show you is how would you do this, without using the dict comprehension. And you will need to take a call which method is cleaner. So what I would do is for number in numbers, right? If number less than 3, let's make this numbers sign dict, right? I'm referencing the key is equal to this, less than 3, else if number is equal to 3, we'll make this equal to 3, equal to 3, else number signs dict, number is greater than 3. And I run this, and if I see my sign dict, it's basically the same output, right? This exactly same output what we saw before. So this is the method without using dictionary comprehension. In some cases, you might want to do this as your statements become more and more complex. You might want to do this for readability. That's perfectly fine. But you might also just choose to do this, right, and make it more readable. Use different methods to make this more readable, right? One method you could do is you could just, like I've used this \, you could make it like if this, right? I can do this, else do this, if this, right, else this, right? And I can also do, yeah, so this is fine. So here this is more readable, and I can say this, right? So I have made this more readable now, and this will be very, very clear for anyone who's reading it. Okay, so this is all about today. I hope you are now getting more and more comfortable with comprehensions in Python. We have introduced these in a lot of detail, and we have talked about conditional statements, multiple if conditions, if you want to use if-else conditions, and if you want to nest it like if, else if, and then else, how would you do this? We've seen this for list comprehensions, set comprehensions, dictionary comprehensions. Now, tomorrow, what we will see is an interesting concept called nested comprehensions. How do you nest these comprehensions together to do more interesting things? And the second thing we will see tomorrow or in the next session is two interesting methods, basically, which will make your code easier to execute, right? One is the range method, the other one is the enumerate function or method, basically. And let's see those tomorrow. And with that, we will conclude our comprehensions discussion. All right. So this is all for today. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will get back to you as soon as I can. If you have not already, hit the subscribe button, push the bell icon for getting notified whenever we have a live session. And if you have any questions, post them in the chat. See you tomorrow. Have a great rest of the day.